The US-Canada border might appear straightforward on a map, but in reality, it is anything but simple. Unlike borders in other nations, which often feature massive walls or heavily guarded checkpoints, this border stretches over 1,349 miles as a 20-foot wide cleared strip of land, commonly called the Slash. Despite the friendly relations between the US and Canada, both nations have taken extreme measures over the centuries to ensure that not a single inch of territory is inadvertently claimed by the other. If you study the map closely, you'll notice that the border does not follow a perfectly straight line. There are numerous irregularities, some of which stem from genuine errors, while others are the result of historical mistakes made when early maps were drawn. Remarkably, a few of these errors were human mistakes, and their consequences have persisted for over 2 centuries. These quirks have led to unusual situations: American homes with Canadian driveways, children whose closest schools are in the neighboring country, and even buildings that serve dual purposes in both nations. Despite being less famous than the US-Mexico border, the northern border is maintained with extraordinary precision. Along thousands of miles, both countries meticulously clear 20 feet of forest, creating an exact, visible boundary. This line is so well maintained that it can be observed from satellite imagery. The upkeep costs the average US taxpayer roughly 50 cents annually, and the International Boundary Commission oversees this maintenance every 6 years. Unlike heavily fortified borders elsewhere, there is no military presence along this line, as the countries enjoy strong economic, cultural, and military alliances. Invading the US through Canada would make little sense, especially since Canada is a NATO member. Any hostile action on Canadian soil would immediately involve Allied forces, making such an approach illogical. Additionally, the terrain itself presents natural challenges. The border passes through numerous hills and mountains, making physical maintenance difficult. Human traffic is minimal. Bears are far more likely to cross the line than people. The unusual nature of this border becomes even clearer when we look at its history. Originally, all this land was part of the British Empire. Traveling from Toronto to New York was once considered internal travel within the same nation. However, after 1776, when the 13 American colonies declared independence, borders had to be drawn between the newly formed United States and British America, as Canada was then known. The transition was not simple. Following the American Revolution, the US and Britain went to war again in 1812. While no territories ultimately changed hands, the British famously burned the White House. Over the years, both nations refined the border, using natural features where possible. On the eastern side, the Great Lakes offered a near-perfect natural boundary, while the western side relied on the 49th parallel. The 1848 Treaty of Oregon formally established this line, and from that point forward, both nations went to extraordinary lengths to ensure the border remained exact. But not everything was perfectly executed. In Minnesota, where the boundary transitions from the Great Lakes to the 49th parallel, a massive mapping error led to the creation of the northwest angle. Early cartographer John Mitchell had misrepresented Lake of the Woods as an oval shape, which caused this remote part of Minnesota to jet northward into what seems like Canadian territory. Locals living there often need to pass through Canada to access other parts of their own state, a unique inconvenience that affects daily life in this isolated area. Schools, grocery trips, and other routines are impacted by this peculiar geography. Children commuting to school may cross the border daily, and bus drivers are required to report students to customs. Despite these inconveniences, the U.S. has no intention of ceding the territory. The land offers valuable fishing resources, and maintaining sovereignty here prevents other regions from requesting annexation to Canada. The border's peculiarities do not stop with Minnesota. Along the western side, past the Great Lakes, the boundary continues along the 49th parallel. Unique structures and settlements have emerged because of these exacting lines. For example, in Stansted, Quebec, and Derby Line, Vermont, a single building functions as both a library in Canada and a theater in the United States. The building has separate addresses on each side, and while the American side has the main entrance, an emergency exit opens into Canada. This unusual arrangement creates logistical quirks, such as vehicles occasionally driving across the border to reach one side unnoticed, highlighting just how peculiar these lines can be. Even roads demonstrate this irregularity. Rue Canusa, as it is known on the Canadian side, and Coosa Street on the American side do not follow the exact parallel, resulting in residents needing passports for what feels like a neighborhood stroll. Despite this, local agreements reduce the friction of daily crossing, and the community manages to navigate these unusual rules without major disruption. Another fascinating case is Point Roberts in Washington state. Isolated from the rest of the United States by land and surrounded by Canada, this small peninsula has become strategically and culturally unique. Canadians frequently cross into Point Roberts for gasoline, which is taxed lower than in Canada, and some even use U.S. postal addresses to avoid international shipping fees. Meanwhile, students in Point Roberts commute long distances to attend schools in Blaine, Washington, covering routes that involve intricate border coordination. Vancouver Island and its surrounding smaller islands also illustrate how cultural and historical ties shaped borders more than geography. Though the island extends below the 49th parallel, it remained Canadian due to colonial significance, trading history, and British influence. Islands such as Kambula Island have residents who identify culturally with Canada but are only accessible through the U.S., further exemplifying the border's complicated realities. The story of these border anomalies highlights the extraordinary friendship and cooperation between the United States and Canada. Unlike borders that often become battlegrounds or points of conflict, this northern boundary shows how two nations can maintain peace, precision, and mutual respect over centuries. Even with historical errors, mapping mistakes, and unusual settlements, either side has sought to alter the established lines aggressively. The northwest angle, Point Roberts, and buildings like the Stansted Derby Line Library are daily reminders of the border's uniqueness. Residents adapt to these quirks, whether it's crossing customs for a short trip, adjusting school commutes, or navigating local roads that zigzag across two nations. At the same time, both governments enforce the rules with consistent attention, ensuring the 20-foot cleared corridor remains intact and visible from satellite imagery, maintaining sovereignty while fostering practical coexistence. Even minor disputes, such as fishing rights in the northwest angle or property boundaries, have been resolved diplomatically. These interactions reflect not only legal frameworks but also a deep respect for historical agreements, natural resources, and local culture. The careful balance ensures that every inch of territory is accounted for, yet the lives of those living near the border can continue with minimal disruption. Ultimately, this border exemplifies a blend of geography, history, and human decision-making. From the Great Lakes to the 49th parallel, and from remote islands to small towns straddling two countries, the U.S.-Canada line remains one of the most fascinating and meticulously maintained borders on Earth. The story of this slash through forests and mountains is more than lines on a map. It is a testament to centuries of negotiation, cooperation, and precision that continues to shape daily life for those living along it. For those who live near these unusual border locations, daily life is full of unique experiences that most people would never encounter. Grocery trips, medical appointments, and even leisure activities can involve crossing into the neighboring country. At the same time, local residents have adapted over generations, learning to navigate customs efficiently, respecting regulations, and embracing the unusual geography as part of their community identity. In places like Point Roberts, families manage long commutes to schools, while Canadian neighbors take advantage of lower taxes, access to goods, and other practical benefits without violating any rules. The historical context of these borderlines also plays a critical role. The errors in mapping, decisions made during treaties, and colonial influences have all combined to create a landscape that seems almost surreal. The northwest angle, for instance, remains part of Minnesota because of a map error from the 18th century, yet the area is fully integrated into American governance, culture, and economy. Similarly, Vancouver Island and smaller surrounding islands retain cultural and historical significance that overrides pure geographical logic, demonstrating how human factors often trump strict lines on a map. This border, meticulously maintained for over 2 centuries, shows that peace, precision, and cooperation can coexist with complexity and irregularity. Both the U.S. and Canada continue to monitor, manage, and adjust the boundary corridor, ensuring it remains clearly defined while allowing the people who live near it to function relatively normally. satellite imagery, annual maintenance by the International Boundary Commission, and consistent adherence to treaties all reinforce the stability of this border, making it a remarkable example of careful governance. Even with all its oddities, the US-Canada border serves as a fascinating example of how geography, history, and diplomacy intersect. Residents have adapted to life in a place where international boundaries are part of daily routines, yet both nations maintain respect for each other's sovereignty. From unusual roadways like Rue Canusa to buildings that serve dual purposes, from islands only accessible through the other country to tiny peninsulas like Point Roberts, every section of this border tells a story. The border's history reflects centuries of negotiation, treaties, and careful mapmaking. Mistakes were made, but rather than causing conflict, they became part of the shared heritage between the two nations. Both governments demonstrate remarkable attention to detail, ensuring the cleared corridor remains intact, the boundaries are respected, and local disputes are resolved peacefully. For anyone studying borders, governance, or human geography, the US-Canada line is an extraordinary case. It shows that even with natural obstacles, human error, and political complexity, nations can maintain stability, cooperation, and order. While most borders evoke images of tension or military might, this one highlights diplomacy, cultural ties, and mutual respect. Ultimately, the US-Canada border is not just a line on a map. It is a living, breathing demonstration of history, human decision-making, and practical coexistence. From the Great Lakes to the 49th parallel, through remote islands and peculiar peninsulas, it is a boundary unlike any other. For the thousands of people who live near it, it is both a challenge and a testament to how two nations can share a long, irregular, yet remarkably peaceful frontier.